Hi everyone, welcome back to Brave Man Died here. We're here at another battlefield in Staffordshire today, and we're going back once again to the Wars of the Roses. Just to give you a quick orientation, we're between the towns of Market Drayton, which is a couple of miles in that direction, and the town of Newcastle-under-Lyme and Stoke-on-Trent, which are a few miles in that direction. The period we're going to cover today is 1459, the 23rd of September to be precise, and we're at the Battle of Blore Heath. Now, the Battle of Blore Heath was a fairly small engagement. When you compare it to something like Towton, it was about a quarter of the size, so relatively small, but significant in its own right. The scenario was pretty much like this. After those initial battles of the Wars of the Roses, there was an uneasy peace for a few years, but then tension started to rise again, mainly because Margaret of Anjou, the Queen, was going around the country soliciting various nobles and securing their support for any future conflict. She was actually awarding them with a small silver swan badge as a mark of their loyalty to her cause in particular. And once that became known to the Yorkist families involved in the dispute, they started to get a little bit worried about what was going on, and they thought it was probably time to concentrate their forces. And so Richard Neville, the Earl of Salisbury as he was at the time, was currently based in Middleham Castle up in Yorkshire. He decided to bring his army southwest towards Ludlow Castle, where the main Yorkist force was, so that the Yorkists could concentrate because they were anticipating trouble. And he came marching down the road there from Newcastle-under-Lyme on the 23rd of September 1459. And as he got here to Blore Heath, he found a Lancastrian force under Lord Audley, the Baron Audley and Baron Dudley, at the far side of this stream, which we'll show you in a minute. They were double the strength of the Earl of Salisbury's force. He came with about 5,000 men. The Lancastrians had assembled 10,000, and the intention was to block the Yorkist movement across country to Ludlow. And here at Blore Heath, on this very spot, is where the battle took place. So we'll have a little look around in a minute. We'll show you the various features. It's quite a difficult battlefield to look at because, as you might be able to hear in the background, the busy A53 still runs straight through the middle of the battle. It's set in quite a steep-sided valley, and so you don't get the big panoramic views that you get in places like Towton. But we'll have a bit of a look around and see what we can find. Okay, so let's just get oriented. We are looking northeast, and in the distance there, a couple of miles, there is a village called Loggerheads, and then beyond that you've got Newcastle-under-Lyme a few miles further on. Along the line of that hedgerow that you can see there as we pan to the right and into the trees, that is the line of the A53, the main road between Market Drayton and Newcastle-under-Lyme. And back in 1459, it was the main road then. And that's the reason the Yorkists were moving down it. They were heading in that direction towards Market Drayton, on past Shrewsbury, and then down towards Ludlow. What happened, though, was at the far side of this valley that you can see, along that high ground, the Lancastrians had positioned themselves. The reports say that in the day there was a large hedge across that sort of high ground, and as the Yorkist scouts advanced down the road, they saw the banners of various Lancastrian nobles sticking up above the hedge, and realised that there was a force blocking their path. They rode back to speak to the Earl of Salisbury, who decided to give battle. Surprising, really, when you consider the Lancastrian force was double the size. They had 10,000 men, and the Earl of Salisbury only had 5,000 with him. The Lancastrians were positioned at the far side of that valley, so that's quite a strong position. And the Lancastrians, all they had to do was block the Yorkist advance and stop them from heading towards Ludlow. So the Lancastrians were in quite a strong position, but nevertheless, the Earl of Salisbury decided to give battle. Now, if we pan back round along the line of the road, come back up to this side. So this would have all been open heathland in the day. The Earl of Salisbury arrived here and decided to deploy his forces. Now, on this side of the road is where he deployed the right-hand side of his line along with his baggage. And over here towards that large tree that you can see on the left of the camera and beyond those hedges, in that area there, the Yorkists pulled all of their wagons into a leaguer. So they put them in a kind of a circle or maybe a square, but essentially created an ad hoc fort to try and secure their right flank. And then the main Yorkist line extended across the open ground there, over the road and onto the other side. And we'll go and have a look at that side of the battlefield in a moment. So that's where they were positioned. Now, as I said earlier, the Yorkists were the ones who were trying to get across this sort of valley behind us and on towards Ludlow. So the Lancastrians just had to sit there and wait. But that's not really how it all panned out in the end. And I think what we'll do is we'll go across the other side of the road, look at the far side of the battlefield, and then we'll just talk through what happened from there. Okay, we've come over to the south side of the A53, and we're now looking northeast up the A53, and we're standing on the Lancastrian side of that valley. This would have probably been the very right rear of the Lancastrian line, and we're looking across to where the Yorkists would have been on the far side of the valley. Now, just across this field in front of us, you can see a hedgerow. I'm guessing that that's probably where the Lancastrians were formed up, somewhere in that area, just on the edge of the forward slope before it drops down into the valley itself. And then where you can see that bright green field at the far side beyond the line of the valley, that's probably where the Yorkists were assembled, and that would have been the extreme left of the Yorkist line. And the reason I'm supposing that is because we know that they faced off across this valley, and that the Yorkists were reluctant to come across it and assault the Lancastrian position. And we also know that there was an exchange of longbow fire at the start of the battle. So that really gives a distance between the two sides of about 300 metres or thereabouts, not much more. Reports suggest that they were engaging at maximum range and that there wasn't much effect from the arrow fire, partly because the Lancastrians were behind the hedge, partly because the Yorkists had created that sort of wagon laager at the far side, and that they were firing at maximum range. So I'm guessing that those are the rough positions of where the lines were. But most of the fighting, the heaviest fighting, and the one where some of the senior casualties were taken, was actually back on the north side of the road. And we'll go back across there in a minute and go and find the memorial cross and the marker for the Lancastrian camp. So this is the very bottom end of the battlefield. It's not a bad spot because it gives you a good vista across the whole area, makes you realise what the lie of the land is like. And that valley that we were looking at is much more pronounced from here. If you sort of pan along, you can see the line of the valley and the high ground at this side where the Lancastrians would have been positioned. And you can see that sort of tree line at the far side from where the Yorkists emerged to find themselves confronted by the Lancastrian blocking force. So we'll go back across in a minute and we'll go and track down the scene of the actual hand-to-hand fighting. Okay, we're now standing right by the A53, which is there, so I apologise for the noise in advance. Here is a memorial to the battle. You can read this for yourself. This is the area of the Lancastrian camp. This is where the Lancastrian forces were formed up before the start of the battle. And the A53 in that direction takes you to Market Drayton. If you swing round this way, you've got the A53 which takes you towards Loggerheads and then on towards Newcastle under Lyme. And it was down there at the other side of that valley where the Yorkists formed up, and along the line of the valley is where all the action took place. As you can see, the A53 is pretty busy, and this is on a Sunday morning early on. It's a pretty busy road, so you have to be careful if you come and visit this battlefield. The A53 really does cut through it and cause a bit of a problem for when you're walking around it. Okay, we're back over to the northwest side of the A53 now, and we're looking across that valley towards where the Lancastrian army was formed up at the start of the battle. They were lining that ridge there where the hedgerow is, and at the start of the battle the two sides exchanged longbow fire. Now, possibly because of the dead ground that you can see, the judging of the distance for the archers wasn't particularly effective, and that exchange of longbow fire didn't really do much damage to either side. And so the Lancastrian forces decided to advance against the Yorkists. Now, if you come and walk the ground, you do sort of wonder why they chose to do that, because the Lancastrians really had the advantage. They were only here to block the Yorkists moving through to Ludlow. They were at the other side of an obstacle. They had twice as many troops, And so really all they had to do was sit there and fend the Yorkists off. It was for the Yorkists to force their way through. But something prompted the Lancastrians to advance across this valley. And as you cross the valley by the road, which is just down there where the road drops away, where the trees are, it actually becomes quite difficult going. And you can maybe just see across the other side of that field there a bit of a steep slope as you come out of the valley, and then follow the road along up here into the open ground where the Yorkists were. So I do wonder what it was that forced the Lancastrians to advance. Now, some of the accounts suggest that the Yorkist centre feigned a withdrawal and made to retreat back towards loggerheads in that direction, and that perhaps that's what prompted the Lancastrians to take the risk and cross this significant obstacle and try and pursue the Yorkists. And then as the Lancastrians came across here, as they were crossing this dead ground here where the road cuts across the valley, the Yorkists turned round again and attacked the Lancastrians while they were quite vulnerable as their formation was broken coming through the valley down there. And just down here amongst all of these trees, actually, and rather unusefully, where the A53 is, this is where the bulk of the fighting took place, the hand-to-hand fighting. Now, I believe that the Lancastrians advanced with mounted troops initially that came across the valley, and it was down there where that fighting took place. And actually, Lord Audley, the commander of the Lancastrians, was killed. There is a cross for him in that direction, literally in line with these trees in the centre of the frame, just at the other side of the A53 and out in the field there. It's called Audley's Cross to mark where he fell. Unfortunately, that's on private ground at the moment, and if you walk across the road, there are signs all the way along the hedgerow saying private property, no entry. So I'm guessing that in the past they've been a little bit annoyed by walkers who've been across that field to look at the cross. It looks very similar to the Towton cross, just a stone cross, memorial cross in the middle of the field there. We'll go down into the dip in a minute. It'll be quite noisy because of the traffic, but we'll go down, just have a quick look at how closed in that area is, and you can imagine what the fighting was like down there. Anyway, according to the accounts, that first Lancastrian attack failed, and they launched a second attack, again coming across this dead ground here with more troops, advanced across here to clash with the Yorkists, and once again it wasn't a very successful story. Lancastrians suffered quite heavily, and there's also a possibility that some of the Lancastrian troops changed sides as well, which wasn't uncommon for the Wars of the Roses. And at that stage, the rest of the Lancastrian forces lost heart and essentially withdrew from the field. And that pretty much was the end of the battle. So it was fairly short, it was fairly sharp, but surprising, because the Lancastrians gave up every advantage that they had to attack the Yorkists at this side of the valley. And the Yorkists, with half the numbers, were able to inflict significant casualties on the enemy, including Lord Audley himself. And that was the Battle of Blore Heath. Okay, we've just come down off the slightly higher ground, and we're in the bottom of the dip where the road crosses the valley. That's the A53 there. See the traffic going past. The road to Loggerheads goes up there. You can just see at the other side of this little paddock, there's a slightly steep-sided hill. And this is the area where the Lancastrians had to cross and then move up towards the Yorkist line. As you can see, the country here is quite close. I doubt on the day you would have had all the trees and things. I think they're fairly modern additions, but either way, you can imagine this sort of valley clogged up with all kinds of undergrowth, probably a little bit boggy as well, and the visibility does drop away down here as you come down into the dip, and you sort of look left and right. You probably couldn't see the two main armies where they were formed up, and it was down in this area here where the Lancastrians were crossing. This is where the Yorkists sort of turned round and came back to attack them and catch them at their most vulnerable. So this is sort of where all the fighting took place, just down here in the dip. And Lord Audley was killed just across the road there, just beyond those trees in the low ground at that side. But sadly, we can't actually get to it because of the private property. So yeah, this is pretty much where all of that initial fighting took place. Okay, so that's the end of today's video. As you can see, Blore Heath is one of those tiny little battlefields. There are lots of them here in the UK, which isn't really marked, apart from Audley's Cross, which is very difficult to get to because of the private property, and the small marker where the Lancastrian camp was. There isn't much here to say that anything happened, and people go about their business. They drive through on this busy road, and they've got no idea what happened here. But you know, right around us, right where we stood now, there was a significant clash of arms. 15,000 odd men back in 1459 fighting for their lives right where we stand. It's an interesting place to come to. It takes a little bit of while to orient yourself, to work out where everything is. There's no car parks or anything. You just got to park up on the verge, tuck yourself out of the way, away from passing traffic and the tractors. But it's a nice area to walk around. The roads, once you get off the A53, are fairly quiet. There's some nice little villages round about, so you can get a few miles in, walk around, get a feel for the area, and get an idea of what the battlefield was like on the day. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you do enjoy these videos, particularly the ones of the Wars of the Roses, you might be interested to know that I've recently written a novel about the Battle of Towton. It's an all-action novel, and it covers the 24 hours of the battle. It's called Bloody Meadow. It's available now on Amazon. So if the Wars of the Roses is your thing, go and give it a read. I'd be very grateful. Anyway, take care, and I'll see you next time.